We have a gentleman in our audience, I'm not quite sure where he is. He's a good friend of mine, Grant Sylvester. He's the president of Money Concepts for Canada. And Grant Sylvester hired us to conduct these seminars way back in the 70s for a large company that he was a senior executive in. And right across the country, they had a 53% increase in sales. Now that's hundreds of people. That's an enormous increase. I want you to think about that for a moment. Here's an idea that gave this little boy honors in schools, gave Grant's company a 50% increase in sales. So you see, I don't really care what you do. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It's you that counts. And the more you understand you, the better your results you're going to get. Now, I'm going to run through a very quick idea, and it's very simple. Don't let the simplicity of this idea deceive you. What we're going to do is run through a concept and explain just how brain cells are built. Now, I'm going to ask someone from the audience. Nino, you're a good friend. Come on up to the front here for a moment. All right, Nino.
Wonderful, Bob.
Give Nino a hand. And if you're sitting in your office or sitting at home, I want you to meet one of the best managers I know.
Thank you.
And I mean that sincerely, and I'm not just saying that to flatter Nino. I'm saying that because of the results that I see as people get. Nino was kind enough to hire my son and daughter-in-law to go to work for them at the beginning of this year, and every month this year, they have earned somewhere between $20,000 and $45,000 a month. Now, you don't do that if you haven't got a real good manager drawing the best out of you. Management is the development of people. It's not the direction of things. So Nino's a very good friend of mine. Now, Nino, I want to ask you a couple of questions. I'm going to do something. What I'd like you to do is hold out your hand like this. All right? Now, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. Now, I would like you to look at that. I want you to see what that is. I don't want anybody to say anything. I'm going to put it in Nino's hand. You just close your eyes, Nino. I'm going to put this in your hand, and I want you to feel it. Close your hand and feel it. Now, Nino, tell me what that is.
It feels like a piece of metal.
Well, move your fingers around it and tell me what kind of a metal. What would you use that for?
I would imagine to open the door.
To open a door. What do you call a piece of metal that opens the door?
A key.
This guy's a real ham, and he put him in front of a camera, and I'm telling you, he'll take it away. You guessed it right, Nino. You win one of our cassette tapes. That is a key. All right? Now, what happened there? Let's stop and think of what happened. Nino has sensory factors. He can hear, see, smell, taste, and touch. And when your sensory factor touch comes in contact with something, a light message is sent through a nerve passageway in your body. It strikes a group of cells in your brain. Those brain cells are activated, and the picture that's in the cells flash on the screen of the mind. So although Nino was not looking at this, which is a sensory factor, and it'll work that way too, he was touching the key, and that triggered the image on the screen of his mind. Now what I'm going to do, I am going to show something to Nino, and I'm going to ask him what it is. Nino, I would like you to tell me what that is.
A pin.
A what?
Pin.
A pin. You think it is?
Yes.
You don't know what it is, do you? You're guessing now, aren't you? Now, you weren't guessing when you told me what that is.
No.
But when I asked you what this little metal object was, you're guessing. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, Nino, what you're really saying is, I had cells of recognition when I touched this, but when I look at this, I have no cells of recognition. Now, we're going to build cells of recognition in your brain. I'm going to tell you what this is, and I'm going to do something with it, and as I do that, instantly, in a millisecond, cells will be built in your brain. That, Nino, has a little plunger on it. Now, as I hit that plunger, something's going to come out of here. Do you see that? That is a toothpick, Nino. That's what your Aunt Marg gives you when you don't need anything, all right? Now that is a toothpick. Now, that's no big deal, and you could miss the whole message here. But you see, Nino didn't know what that is. You know what he was saying? I don't have any cells of recognition in my brain. Now, when you go home, Nino, you can tell Rose that you built some brain cells this morning. She can love more of you, all right? You take more of her home. But that's exactly what that is, all right? and we just built some brain cells.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nino. Nino Spazzeri is, without question, one of the greatest real estate sales managers I've ever met. And you know, I told Brian something, and I'm going to tell you something. Whenever you go to do something, make certain that the people you surround yourself with are very successful. Carl Menninger one point in time pointed out that environment is more important than heredity. In other words, the people you find yourself surrounded by are more important to your success, your well-being, than what's built right into your genes at birth. And I suggested Brian go and see Nino. I told Leslie go see Nino, go to work for the man and listen to him and do what he tells you. And he'll draw the best out of you. And that's exactly what he's doing. Now, we're going to build some brain cells with respect to the mind. All right? And as we build these brain cells with respect to the mind, we're going to build a picture of our mind right in here. And then as we get that picture in here, we can start making headway and making some of the adjustments that must have an image of our mind. Without an image, we have confusion. So that's very, very important. Now, I would like to introduce you to someone who I wrote about in Born Rich, Heinz and Donna Dawes. They came to the seminar, and their circumstance was doom and gloom.
We had bought this house in July of 1975 after being expropriated for the Pickering Airport fiasco north of the city. And almost every evening I would come home and I would be extremely negative, started to take out my frustrations on Donna because the mortgage payments and everything else was more than what we expected. And after you buy a home, you have to buy curtains and things like that. From 7:30, I believe, until 10:30 at night, I would probably say during those 3 hours my life changed totally. Because from an almost decision to having to sell this house to 3 hours later to having a target of having a Cadillac paid for in 3 weeks, that is a tremendous change.
An important point here is that Heinz Dawes had been an insurance agent for 15 years. He had great information. He had heard many motivational speakers, but he was still at the financial point where he was going to have to sell his house. Heinz's problem was confusion. He did not have an image of his mind, and that's what made the difference.
Unfortunately, a lot of those, if you want to call them motivational speakers, are geared on a very narrow, specific point. And yes, it may give you an immediate shot of adrenaline, but very quickly wears down because you are not given the understanding of how it works. If I know how something works, as opposed to simply being told blindly as to how to do it, I have a different understanding.
So that was the difference.
Yes, the very easy, understandable way that Bob explains how the mind works, how you control the mind with your thoughts, and how the results are obtained. I got my Cadillac in 22 days after I made that promise to myself.
Now I'd like you to come with me, and just the same as we were able to help Heinz and Donna and millions of others, I want to help you. Watch closely, and we will create an image of your mind that you can work with for the rest of this program, for the rest of your life. What we will have then are cells of recognition when we think of our mind, rather than drawing a blank or drawing on a picture of the brain, we actually have a workable image that we can start to use. Now, before we do that, let me mention something here about a gentleman I heard speak way back in the early 70s. I was fortunate enough to be on a program in Chicago at a Human Resource Congress with a gentleman named Frank Goebel. Frank Goebel had been an aerospace engineer. He was the president of an aerospace company. And one day he was working on his budget, and he realized that 65 cents out of every dollar revenue coming into that company was going back out of the company again to employees for either salaries or benefits. And he suddenly realized he knew virtually nothing about people. Here he was spending 65% of all the revenue on something he knew virtually nothing about. He said, I knew an awful lot about engineering, and I knew a fair amount about aerospace, but I knew very little about people. And so he said that he decided he would study some psychology, and fortunately for him, he ended up collaborating with Abraham Maslow. Now, Maslow made a breakthrough, the like of which is maybe only made every few thousand years. He had come to the conclusion that you and I have infinite potential. He's written a paper. He left aerospace engineering, and he went on to start the Thomas Jefferson Research Center out in Pasadena. In a paper called The Productive Person, Goebel wrote, by nature, you and I are alike. By practice, we get wide apart. There's the difference in our results again. Now, he said the difference between the most dissimilar characters, between the real achievers and the non-achievers, for example, seems to arise not so much from nature as from habit, custom, and education. He went on to quote William James, who concluded that we use a very small part of our real potential. And James said that most people live, whether physically, intellectually, or morally, in a very restricted circle of our potential being. We make use of a very small portion of our possible consciousness and of our soul's resources in general. Much like the person who out of their entire bodily organism would get into the habit of using and moving only their little finger. I want you to think for a moment, if you had a child and that child was laying perfectly still in its crib, and the only part of its body it was ever able to move was its little finger. I'm quite certain that you would probably beg, you would borrow, and if you had to, you would steal to find out what's wrong with that child. But isn't it strange that a human being can stop growing mentally at a very early age, and it can be virtually ignored? This is, without question, one of the most important subjects we can go to. I want to refer back to something Napoleon Hill wrote again that caught my attention when I first read the book. He pointed out in here, somewhere in your makeup, there lies sleeping the seed of achievement, which, if aroused and put into action, will carry you to heights such as you may have never hoped to attain. Do you know, as I think of this and as I read it now, I'm doing things today that 27 years ago, if anyone had suggested, I would have thought they were hallucinating. I take a look at my paycheck today. It's so completely different than it was when I first started to study this. In fact, the same people that used to pay me $4,000 a year are now paying me $4,000 an hour. And the only thing that's really changed is what's going on inside. Everything was already there. It's just a matter of learning how to use it. Now, he said, just as a master musician may cause the most beautiful strains of music to pour forth from the strings of a violin, so may you arouse the genius which lies asleep in your brain and cause it to drive you upwards towards any goal you may wish to achieve. Now, I'm going to put a couple of marks on the board, and I want you to really think seriously about this. You know, human organizations, as we know them today, are not going to last much longer. And that is because we have built them on a false premise. These organizations have been built on the premise that you and I are physical beings, and we're really not. We are spiritual beings living in physical bodies. And we've been gifted with something called an intellect. And by learning to use the intellectual factors in our personality, we can tap into the higher side of our own nature and improve anything in our physical world. But you know, to the average person, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And it may not make a whole lot of sense to you, as I just said it. But you're going to find as we go along with this, and as we keep working with this idea, it's going to make an awful lot of sense to you. Now, I have found when we start to study ourselves, there's only 2 points of reference we can go to. One is science, and the other is theology. There doesn't seem to be anywhere else to go. I have found that there are only 6 basic religions. Now, I spent quite a bit of time living and working in California. I think there's something like 4,000 religions in California, but everybody starts their own out there because there's tax breaks, you see. So But you're still going to find there's just 6 basic religions, and they all teach us essentially the same thing. They teach us that we are non-physical beings. They may use a different word, but the concept is the same. Do you know, it's a strange thing. Most people don't even know much about their own religion, and yet they say mine's right and all the rest are wrong, and they don't even know what the others are. I have found that every one of them has the truth in it. We are non-physical beings. See, the truth is something like the center of town. It really doesn't matter which side you approach it from. When you get there, you're in the same place. Now, the other area that we might want to look at is science. Science tells you your energy. As a matter of fact, a DuPont scientist many years ago said that the electrons and the atoms of your body contain a potential energy of more than 11 million kilowatt hours per pound. Do you know that there's enough potential energy locked up in that thing that you're sitting in that we call a body to light up this whole North American continent for nearly a week? And then you'll hear people say, I haven't got any energy. What a ridiculous statement. That's all we are, is a mass of energy. Do you know this thing you're living in vibrates? It glows. As a matter of fact, there is an aura of energy around your body. That is the cells leaving your body. Your body changes at the rate of about 50,000 cells per second. And as the cells leave the body, new ones are created. And you know you can photograph the energy leaving the body. Semyon Kurlian, way back in the early 30s, perfected a form of photography where he could take and photograph mass, and the rays of energy coming from the body would penetrate the camera, penetrate the film, and you'd actually catch it on the film. And you'd photograph the density and the color of it. I would imagine you're very familiar with this, are you, honey? That's right. And you know, as the image in a person's mind changes, the vibration of their body changes, and the density and the color of this energy changes, and changes dramatically. Do you know you've even got a mental faculty where you can start to feel that energy coming from a person, and you can determine the mood they're in very, very quickly. You can virtually read what's going on inside an individual. Now, as we study this, we're going to find that this side and this side is actually all hooked up. Think of this for a second. You see sitting here on the lectern a glass of water. Now, let's stop and think about this for a moment. We call that glass. It's actually energy. Because of the speed it's vibrating at, we call it glass. We call this water. That's what it is. It's water. But it's actually energy too. As a matter of fact, the ring that's hitting it is energy, and the finger that the ring is on is energy. Everything's energy. Everything vibrates at a different speed. But stay with me here for a moment. What we're talking about here is energy. Now, while the energy is in the vibratory rate it's in that glass, we're going to call it water. And we call it water because it's vibrating at a physical or a corporeal state. If you were to add heat to that energy that we call water, you wouldn't call it water anymore. Then you would change the terminology that you would use. It'd be the same energy, but it would be moving faster and a higher speed of vibration. Then we would call it steam or vapor. And we would call the energy steam or vapor because it's not in a physical vibration. It's now moved into what we call an astral vibration. If we were to continue to add heat to that energy that we now call steam, you wouldn't call it steam any longer. You would call it air, ether, or gas. And that's because it's not in an astral vibration any longer. It's moved into now what we call an etheric vibration. But every level, it's the same energy. Now, as we take a look at this, we're going to let these lines represent levels of vibration, or, as we more commonly refer to them, as frequencies. And you know, each frequency is hooked up to the one above and the one below. There's no line of demarcation where one stops and the other starts. See, every frequency, it's like the colors of a rainbow. As they fit together, there's no place where one color stops and the other starts. They're all joined together. Now, you're never going to see that with something you call sight. Sight is a physical sensory factor. You have to go to one of your higher faculties, and you develop this through understanding. You start to understand. So you see, the part of us that we cannot see and the part we can see is all the same. This is just the flip side of the coin of this. Spirit always manifests through its polar opposite. We have the ability right here to tap in to this great power that I choose to refer to as spirit, and we can tap in with an intellect, and we can cause this power to literally move into form, into something we call an idea. That idea must literally move into something we refer to as results. You see, both science and theology clearly indicate nothing is created or destroyed. The only thing you can do is cause it to change. Now, this particular program is about prosperity. And when we think of prosperity, money plays a very large role. But of course, so do relationships, and so does the health of our body. But let's go back and think about money for a moment. Now, when you think about money, money is really an idea. You say, that's money. No, money is an idea. It's manifest on paper. Now, paper used to be wood. I remember when I was a little boy, I lived way up in Michipicoten Harbor. That's about 3 wigwams this side of the North Pole. It's a little north of King Garden, I think. But at any rate, when I lived up there, I'd watch them take these large logs out on flat cars on the railroad. And I remember people telling me that they were going to make paper out of it. I thought, how do you make paper out of a tree? It didn't seem to make sense. Well, you alter the vibratory rate of the energy that's called wood, and pretty soon it's called paper. And then you put ink on it, and now we call it money. Now let's think about this money for a moment. If it can be neither created nor destroyed, it must already be here. If we can't destroy it, if heat will cause the energy that we call water to move into an etheric state, I would imagine heat would cause what we call money to move into an etheric state. And there it goes. Now where is it? You say it's gone. It's not gone. Still here. You see, you'll never see it on the level it's on now with your physical sensory factor sight. But if you use your intellect and develop understanding, you'll know that it's still here. What we want to do is cause it to move into form. Now that's just about as bizarre as anything you'll ever hear to some people's ears. But I'm going to tell you, it's just as true as anything you'll ever hear if you understand natural laws. And what I'm talking about is moving your mind into a higher vibration, developing a higher consciousness, and you can literally attract all the good that you want. You see, money is literally attracted to us, or it's repelled.